Before his death, The Tonight Show legend Johnny Carson carried with him a vault of Hollywood secrets, stories that were never told on air, moments the cameras missed, and confessions that stunned even him. For 3 decades, Carson was America's midnight companion, the man who could make or break a career with a single smirk or a perfectly timed silence. But what the world didn't know was that behind his calm, witty demeanor, Carson had become the quiet keeper of secrets. 9 unforgettable guests who had revealed shocking truths backstage, far from the glow of studio lights. From 1962 to 1992, The Tonight Show. Starring Johnny Carson was more than entertainment. It was an institution. Every star who mattered passed through those famous curtains. Actors, musicians, politicians, and comedians sat in that blue chair, nervously waiting for Carson's raised eyebrow or disarming joke. He had an unmatched gift. He made everyone feel comfortable enough to let their guard down. And when they did, the real Hollywood, the one hidden behind smiles and rehearsed stories, quietly emerged. Carson never betrayed his guests, but his friends say that in private, he often spoke about the moments that shocked him the most. People trusted Johnny, said one former staff member. He had this ability to draw out honesty. Sometimes it was funny, sometimes emotional, but sometimes it was something much deeper. Some guests revealed pain. Others confessed the price of fame. A few shared secrets so personal that Carson never repeated them, not even to his closest circle. Over the years, those encounters changed him. The man who started out wanting to make people laugh slowly became more introspective, even haunted by what he'd heard. It wasn't just talk show gossip, one longtime producer remembered. These were people unburdening themselves to him, like he was a therapist they could trust. As Carson grew older, he began to reflect on his legacy. Not the awards or the ratings, but the moments of truth that happened in the quiet spaces between laughter. When you do this job long enough, he once told a friend, you stop hearing the jokes. You start hearing what people really mean. In his final years, Carson reportedly compiled a list, not for publication, but for remembrance, of 9 guests who had made the deepest impression on him. They weren't necessarily the most famous or the funniest, but the most honest, the ones who had dropped the mask, even if only for a moment. They showed me who they really were, he said. And that's something rare in this business. After his death in 2005, those who worked closest to him began to share fragments of what Johnny had revealed, small glimpses into the untold stories behind the curtain. From late-night tears to off-air revelations that could have changed public perception forever, these moments paint a portrait of a man who had seen the real Hollywood, fragile, flawed, and deeply human. The public may remember Johnny Carson for his effortless humor, his dazzling charm, and his unforgettable timing. But behind that desk sat a man who quietly carried the weight of 9 stories that revealed more about the soul of fame than any headline ever could, as one of his longtime band members said. Shortly before his own passing, Johnny never gossiped, never told tales. But near the end you could tell. Those memories were heavy on him. It was like he'd been keeping Hollywood's secrets safe for too long. And in his final interviews, just months before his death, Carson finally hinted at what he'd always known. That behind the laughter, the glamour, and the applause, there were hidden truths about the people America thought it knew best. 9 guests, 9 stories, 9 secrets that stayed locked away until Johnny Carson decided to let the truth slip through his signature smile. It was an ordinary evening at NBC's Studio 6B in Burbank. The stage lights blazed, the band tuned up, and Johnny Carson stood behind the curtain calm as ever. The year was 1978, a golden age for The Tonight Show, when every major star in Hollywood wanted to sit across from Johnny's desk. To America, Carson was untouchable, a man who could make presidents laugh and make movie legends sweat. But that night, something unexpected happened, a moment that would quietly shift the way Johnny looked at his own show forever. The guest that evening was one of Hollywood's most adored stars, someone known for their charisma, their humor, and their spotless public image. They had done the show a dozen times before, always charming, always safe. But just minutes before the broadcast, as the cameras were being checked and the audience filed in, Carson's producer whispered something unusual. He doesn't want to talk about his movie tonight. He says he wants to talk about something real. Johnny raised an eyebrow. That was rare. Few guests ever wanted to go off script. The studio audience expected jokes, not confessions. But Carson was curious. He'd built his entire career on reading people, knowing when to push, when to step back, when to let a silence hang long enough to make someone tell the truth. The interview began like any other. Johnny cracked a few jokes, the audience roared, and for a few minutes, it was business as usual. But then the tone shifted. The guest grew quiet, their hands trembling slightly on the armrest. Johnny noticed. "You all right?" he asked softly, his voice losing that usual comedic edge. What followed was one of the most raw, human moments in the show's history. The guest spoke, not about fame or film, but about loneliness, about pressure, about living behind a mask the world demanded they wear. "People think they know me," the guest said, eyes glistening under the studio lights. "But they only know the version of me that sells." The crowd went silent. There was no punchline, no applause, just honesty and a fragile and unplanned. For the first time, Johnny didn't steer the conversation back to comfort. He let the silence breathe. He nodded gently as if to say, "I understand." And in that quiet understanding, something broke open. After the show, when the cameras shut off and the lights dimmed, the guest turned to Johnny backstage. "I've never said any of that before," they whispered. "I don't know why I did tonight." Johnny, who had spent a lifetime keeping his own emotions hidden behind humor, simply replied, "Because it was time." From that night forward, Carson saw his stage differently. The blue curtain wasn't just a gateway for comedy anymore. It had become a kind of confessional. Behind every laugh, every performance, every story told for the sake of the audience, there was something deeper. A truth people were aching to share if only someone made them feel safe enough to do it. His longtime producer recalled years later, that show changed him. He realized that people came to him not just to promote movies, they came to be understood. Over the next 2 decades, Carson would witness moments of raw humanity that the cameras never caught, private admissions, quiet tears, unexpected gratitude. He never exploited them. He never gossiped. He simply listened. And in those late-night hours, long after the studio emptied, he would sometimes sit in his office, thinking about the confessions he'd heard. In his final years, Johnny reportedly told a friend, "It wasn't the laughs I remembered most. It was the truth people told when they thought nobody was really listening." And that night in 1978, the night one brave guest decided to drop the facade, was the first time Johnny Carson realized that the Tonight Show wasn't just about entertainment. It was about humanity. 9 guests, 9 truths, each one revealing a piece of Hollywood's heart, and in time, Johnny's own. The magic of The Tonight Show was always in its timing. Laughter, applause, a perfectly placed pause. But for Johnny Carson, timing meant more than just comedy. It meant understanding when to ask, when to listen, and when to simply let the moment happen. By the early 1980s, Carson had become more than just a talk show host. He was a confidant to the biggest names in Hollywood. Celebrities who wouldn't reveal a thing to the press somehow opened up under Johnny's calm gaze. There was something about him, the quiet strength, the empathy behind the jokes that made people forget the cameras were even there. One night in 1983, an acclaimed actress, a household name whose career had spanned decades, walked through those iconic blue curtains. Everyone expected a fun interview about her new romantic comedy. Instead, she used her few minutes on national television to speak about something no one expected, the cost of fame. Johnny asked a simple question, "Do you ever miss being unknown?" And it stopped her cold. The audience laughed at first, assuming it was a joke. But when the actress looked down, her voice breaking slightly, the laughter faded. "Every day," she said softly. "People see me, but they don't really see me." The studio went silent again, the kind of silence Johnny had learned to trust. He didn't rush to fill it. He didn't turn it into a gag. He just nodded, offering that familiar half-smile that told her she could go on. In that moment, the star revealed that behind the glamour and perfection, she had spent years struggling with isolation. "You give so much of yourself to the public," she said, "that sometimes there's nothing left when you go home." Carson leaned forward slightly, his tone gentle. "Does it ever get easier?" She shook her head. "You just learn to hide it better." When the cameras cut to commercial, Johnny reached across the desk, touched her hand, and said quietly, "You did good tonight. People needed to hear that." That episode would never be replayed in highlight reels or viral clips, but it was one of those nights that stuck with him. The kind of raw honesty that television rarely captured. Privately, Carson once told his producer, "Everyone's performing out there, even the ones who don't know it. But sometimes, when the lights are just right, they drop the act. That's when you see who they really are." And he wasn't just talking about guests, he was talking about himself, too. Despite being the most recognized man on late-night television, Johnny Carson was famously private. His colleagues often said that no one really knew Johnny, not even those closest to him. He gave the world a version of himself that was sharp, funny, and unflappable. But few ever saw the man who sat alone in his dressing room afterward. Staring at the floor, lost in thought, that duality fascinated him. Maybe that's why he connected so deeply with guests who revealed cracks in their perfect Hollywood shells. They reminded him that fame was just another mask. In later years, when friends asked why he never wrote a tell-all book, Johnny would just smile and say, "Some secrets are better kept sacred." But near the end of his life, he finally began opening up, not to the public, but to a few trusted people. He talked about those unforgettable moments, the times when guests dropped their guard and showed their truest selves. He never named names, but those close to him said he spoke with awe, even gratitude about the courage he'd witnessed. "It takes more guts to be vulnerable on television than to make people laugh," he once said, and that's what he admired most. Not the fame, not the wealth, not the applause, but the truth. Behind the curtain, away from the flashing lights, Johnny Carson had seen the hidden faces of Hollywood, and though he never exposed them, he carried their stories like fragile treasures, proof that even in the glittering world of entertainment, humanity still flickered quietly beneath the surface. By the late 1980s, Johnny Carson had become more than a talk show host. He was the heartbeat of America's living rooms. Every night, millions tuned in to hear his monologue, his laughter, his subtle teasing of Hollywood's elite. But what viewers didn't know was that behind those witty smiles, Johnny was quietly collecting stories, pieces of truth that guests entrusted to him off camera. They weren't confessions meant for the world, but for the man behind the desk who seemed to understand the loneliness of fame better than anyone. Over the years, his dressing room became a sanctuary, a quiet, dimly lit space where guests would often linger after taping. Sometimes they came to unwind. Other times they came to unburden, and Johnny, with his trademark gentleness, would just listen. One producer later recalled walking in after a show to find Carson sitting with a beloved comedian, one who had just brought the house down on stage. Yet when the laughter ended, the man broke down in tears. "They love me for who I pretend to be," he told Johnny, "not for who I really am." Carson said nothing at first. He handed him a glass of water and simply let the silence stretch. "You'd be surprised," Johnny finally replied, "how many people in this town feel the same way." That moment, like so many others, never made it into tabloids or memoirs. But it became part of a larger pattern, a series of deeply human encounters that shaped how Johnny saw Hollywood and the people who kept it shining. To the world, these were untouchable icons. But in private, Johnny saw the fragility, the heartbreak, and the longing behind every carefully rehearsed smile. One night, a legendary musician stopped by the show for what was supposed to be a lighthearted appearance. Off camera, he confessed to Carson that success had taken everything from him: friends, family, peace of mind. "I used to love what I do," he said. "Now it feels like a cage made of applause." Johnny nodded knowingly. "You can't live for the cheers," he said. They stop the moment the curtain falls. For Carson, those encounters were like quiet reminders of his own truth. Despite being adored by millions, he had never felt truly understood. 3 marriages had come and gone. He rarely appeared at Hollywood parties. When he wasn't working, he escaped to the sea, sailing alone, searching for peace away from the noise. He once told a friend, "People think I'm surrounded by laughter, but most nights I go home to silence." It was that honesty, that quiet understanding of pain behind fame, that drew people to him. Guests could sense that Johnny wasn't judging them. He was seeing them. In an industry built on illusion, that was rare, and though he would never write down the details, those who spoke to him in confidence became part of a private mental list. 9 people, 9 moments, 9 truths that stayed with him long after the applause faded. Each of those conversations taught him something profound about life in the spotlight. That the higher you rise, the lonelier it becomes. That the loudest laughs often hide the deepest wounds. And that sometimes, the truest thing a person can do is admit they're not okay. As the years went on, Johnny began to see his show differently. It wasn't just a stage for entertainment. It had become a window into the human condition. When asked once what he'd learned after decades behind that desk, Johnny paused and said, "Everyone who sits across from me wants the same thing, to be remembered for who they really were, not who the world thought they were." And that's what he carried with him long after the show ended. Not the ratings, not the fame, but the memories of those quiet moments when the curtain fell and the masks came off. He never named them publicly. He didn't have to. To Johnny Carson, those 9 guests were more than celebrities. They were reminders that even the brightest stars still cast shadows. By the early 1990s, the golden age of The Tonight Show was nearing its end. Johnny Carson, the man who had ruled late-night television for 3 decades, was preparing to say goodbye. Behind the scenes, he seemed more reflective than ever. Quieter, more observant, as if the years of laughter had finally given way to introspection. He had interviewed thousands of guests. Presidents, movie stars, musicians, comedians, everyone who mattered had sat across from him. But as his final episodes approached, Johnny wasn't thinking about the fame. He was thinking about the 9 guests whose honesty had touched him in ways the public would never know. One of those memories haunted him the most. It was from a night years earlier, long forgotten by the audience but forever etched in his mind. A guest, an actor known for his confidence and charm, had come on the show looking visibly shaken. Backstage, Carson had noticed something off. His usual spark was gone, replaced by a heaviness that even the studio lights couldn't disguise. When the interview began, the man tried to perform, cracking jokes and smiling for the crowd. But Johnny, always a master of reading faces, saw through it instantly. Halfway through the segment, he gently interrupted the banter with a single question. "Are you okay?" It wasn't scripted. It wasn't planned. But that one question broke something open. The actor hesitated, swallowed hard, and said softly, "I don't think I am." The crowd, unsure whether to laugh or not, fell silent. The air in the studio grew thick. And Johnny, in that instant, became less of a host and more of a human being offering another human a lifeline. Off camera, after the segment ended, the actor stayed behind. He confessed that he had been battling inner demons, the kind that fame couldn't fix. Johnny listened, really listened. And when it was over, he didn't give advice. He just said, "You're not alone. That moment would never make the papers." But years later, as Carson grew older and more private, he spoke of it often to those closest to him. "It was the first time I realized how powerful listening could be," he told a friend. "All I did was give him space to be real, and for some people, that's all they need." When The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson aired its final episode in 1992, America cried. Decades of laughter, warmth, and familiarity came to an end. But behind the curtain, Carson wasn't thinking about ratings or applause. He was thinking about connection, the invisible thread that linked him to the millions who watched and to the few who had opened their hearts under his gentle gaze. After retirement, Johnny withdrew from public life almost completely. He refused interviews, rarely appeared in public, and spent much of his time sailing the Pacific or writing quietly in his home office. Friends said he seemed content, but also contemplative, like a man replaying memories only he could understand. In his final years, he reportedly confided to a close companion that those 9 guests, the ones who had revealed their deepest truths, had changed the way he saw humanity. "They made me realize that even the most beautiful lives can be built on pain," he said. And that's okay. That's what makes us real. When Carson passed away in 2005, tributes poured in from every corner of the entertainment world. Colleagues spoke of his timing, his wit, his brilliance. But those who truly knew him remembered something else: his compassion. The quiet empathy that made The Tonight Show not just a talk show, but a sanctuary. In the years since, stories have surfaced about those private conversations, those fragile moments when stars stopped performing and simply were. No one will ever know exactly who those 9 guests were, and maybe that's how Johnny wanted it. Because to him, their names didn't matter. Their truth did. As one of his writers once said, Johnny didn't just host a show. He gave people a place to be honest, even if it was only for 5 minutes. And perhaps that's the real legacy he left behind. Not the fame, not the fortune, not even the laughter, but the understanding that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is silence, compassion, and the courage to let them be seen. In the end, Johnny Carson's greatest interviews weren't about entertainment at all. They were about humanity, fragile, unfiltered, and unforgettable.